everyone, my name is Dessa, aka Writing from the Shadows.
I'm Rika, aka Vestigial Claws.
And welcome to Work in Progress. For this episode, Rika read Chapter 5 of Where Your Loyalties Lie. If you've read the fic before, you know why we're dressed in business chic. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into the chapter.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna just start with just some opening notes. This was a very exciting chapter. We had a lot happen here, mostly towards the end of this chapter.
Yeah.
We had some things happen. Some initial notes, things that I've noticed. Again, I'm enjoying your Higuchi characterization.
Thank you.
We don't see a lot of her so far in this story, but the character that she's established as is someone that I can understand why she has the position that she has, and I can understand why she has the trust that she has, and I enjoy the fact that that's kind of Chuya's connection. I've actually noticed a little bit of a theme that you have here with a lot of who Chuya tends to like, and is there any particular reason why your Chuya seems to be getting along really well with women?
I'm gay.
She is a lesbian ally.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you can back me up on this, and I feel like a lot of Twitter can back me up on this, is that Chuya is a lesbian ally. And it's just something, anyone that follows me on Twitter knows that I have just this large crusade about the women in BSD not having their own agency in canon, being kind of used and tossed when it comes to plot points and storylines and that sort of thing. And so whenever I write a chapter fic for this fandom, the ladies get much more important than they are in canon. It's just always how I've done it, and, you know, it's just what I like doing.
That makes me very, very interested about where Yosano is and if/when she will show up. Because she's obviously, I think she's one of the only non-guild BSD ladies that we haven't seen yet. So I
We also haven't seen Kyoka.
That's true. Kyoka has not been around. So yeah, I'm interested to see Yosano and Kyoka, especially knowing that. I do think that it's very neat that all of Chuya's friends are ladies.
Me too.
Like that. It makes me happy.
But if we want to talk about the reasoning from the story standpoint and not from just me, part of it really has to do with the relationship that Chuya had growing up. As it's kind of been hinted in the story, Chuya was closer to his mother than he was with his father. I don't know why. I think I just wanted to use the hairpins. I was like, Chuya was close with his mom. Here we go. And then, you know, when you have Koyu around being the boss of an entire organization, she's just somebody that's going to want to hire an equal amount of women. There is equal pay in the Nakahara Kai. They are great with their gender equality.
Are they the mafia?
Yes.
Do they discriminate?
No. They kill everyone equally.
And they employ so many women.
Yes, competent women.
This is just offering equal opportunity. This is a very good business philosophy. Thank you, Ozaki Koyo.
Yeah.
My next little kind of silly note is Dazai's driving. As soon as the passage was like, yeah, Dazai's kind of gonna be driving this car, I was like, because I know that you might not have read Dazai's entrance exam and too much of the off-canon material for Bungo, but his inability to drive is something, it's one of my favorite things about him in canon, actually. I just think it's cute, so I really enjoy when it comes up in fics. Because almost universally, I don't know if I've ever met someone in the Bungo Stray Dogs fandom who's like, yeah, Dazai seems like he would be a very good, very safe driver.
No. And I haven't read Dazai's entrance exam, and the big ongoing joke, because I don't know what's going on in canon ever, but kind of the caveat to that is that when I first started writing her BSD, I was like, I need to know about canon, because my first story was loosely in canon verse. So I basically have everyone's wiki pages memorized, so I do know that Dazai is canonically a bad driver.
Terrible driver.
Yeah, I just don't know what's going on these days.
Specifically, I enjoy the characterization of his driving as being very fast reflexed, but lacking a reasonable fear of death.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a very apt description of just about anything that a Dazai can do. And it makes a ton of sense for his driving, so that made me smile. So, moving on to a little bit more of the like kind of chunkier, meatier end of this chapter was we get into the dinner date, and we get into Chuya, who is kind of thrown by this, and they get to the restaurant, and Chuya immediately is like, people are looking at me.
Yeah.
But he dismisses that. And then we come to find out that it's not just his imagination. He's not actually being paranoid. Like, they're actually in enemy territory. And so he has to kind of split reevaluate. Like, no, people aren't actually staring at you in public, all the way up to, yes, people are staring at me. People actively want to kill me in this public place.
Yeah.
So Chuya is still kind of going through a lot of these situations without knowing too much. And here, I think we kind of saw that whatever's going on with Chuya, would you say that, especially given that he initially dismissed his instincts, is he kind of a little bit discombobulated, I guess, by events? Like, would that be a typical Chuya thing to get that, like, that insight into a situation and dismiss it until it's validated?
No, that's not typical Chuya behavior. There's a couple of different factors that's really playing into Chuya's second-guessing his instincts here. The first being the fact that there is a plant in the organization. So we start off with Chuya being in this organization that's hated his family forever. He has no connections anywhere, so he's already going to be on his guard. And then he learns that this organization that he already doesn't like, that already doesn't trust him and that he doesn't trust, has a mole, which makes you more paranoid. And so it's kind of those two factors of Chuya aware that there's a base level of paranoia around him at all times against the instinct. So it's kind of the anxiety thing where you're like, is there actually a problem here, or is it just my anxiety? And so Chuya had one of those moments, and he assumed that if Dazai was going to take him into enemy territory, Dazai would say something about that, which he did not.
First mistake, imagining a Dazai is going to have any sort of common courtesy.
Yes. So it was a good lesson learned for Chuya here, but usually if he was in control of his own circumstances, if he had that gut instinct, he would have followed it immediately.
Okay, so we are very much, I'm delighted, but I'm picking up on how much foundation you're laying of exactly how fish out of water Chuya is doing currently. I appreciate the fact that, again, Dazai seems to have impeccable fashion sense in what he picked for Chuya to wear.
Yeah.
Also, really appreciated the little throwaway line about Chuya with his hair in a bun. That is just some choice content, and I can only imagine the reactions to that were very positive.
I mean, I didn't care about the reactions. That was all for me. I owe every artist that has ever drawn Chuya with his hair up my life. It's just a trope I really like. And I've told Rika this off camera, but in the author's commentary for this, there's actually a shot counter for how many times I have Chuya put his hair up, because it happens a lot. And it's just, they're usually throwaway lines, like the first or second chapter, he was training, his hair was up. The wedding, his hair was up. For this, his hair is up. I just keep putting his hair up. It's hot.
It's doing us a great service. I'm appreciating the mental imagery of Chuya with his lovely, lovely chew buns.
Yeah, I just take issue with his canon hairstyle. It's a little bit of like a mullet rat tail, and I hate that. I don't know why there's so many mullets in BSD, but I don't condone it. And so, in my opinion, the best way to deal with Chuya's hairstyle without chopping it off, which I think would have a very large reaction from a reader base, is to put it up.
You know what? I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it suits him, and I feel like he would appreciate your desires to salvage his image.
I sure hope he would.
Let's see. One of my other kind of main points is Dazai's tattoos. That was actually not what I was expecting to be under the bandages, but I am very, very pleased that it was. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the research you did on Irezumi and on just like the traditions of Yakuza tattoos? Because you touched on it a little bit in there, and I can tell that you did the research on it, and it's just a really, really fascinating tradition.
It really is, and there will be more mentions of tattoos in Irezumi as the fic goes through the story. But honestly, when I went to research it, I just ended up watching YouTube videos for like a day. I don't have any tattoos, but I just find the art of tattooing really fascinating. I just haven't been able to afford tattoos. So I've watched like every season of Ink Master. I know way more about tattoos than anyone without tattoos probably should. And so in that vein, I was like, okay, I've done the there's nothing under Dazai's bandages. I've done the there's a bunch of scars under Dazai's bandages. How do we switch it up? This is a Yakuza fic. We gotta bring the Irezumi in it. I think it would have been like, blasphemy. That's what I'm thinking. Blasphemy to write a Yakuza fic and not have at least one of them with tattoos all over their back. And so there's actually fan art of this scene that I will show you later and that I will retweet as well. That's really fascinating. But when we look at the tradition of Irezumi, because it's coming from the Yakuza culture, it's a taboo in tattooing until really very recent times. It's very, very taboo in Japan for that reason, because it was kind of tied together. And it's just such a meticulous art. It's something that it's still an apprentice trade, so you have to find a master. The master has to teach you. They don't use tattoo machines. So the really fast multi-needle machines that we see in a lot of American tattooing, that's not what you're going to see in Irezumi. If you're thinking in American terms, the most, I think, comparable type of tattooing would be prison-style single-needle tattooing.
Yes.
Yeah. And, there's this, I want to say it was Vice, had a 40-minute YouTube video where they went and found one of the last living masters and just interviewed him. He had like his parts of his fingers missing from chopping off knuckles and that sort of thing, and just the respect that they have for the piece and the fact that every piece is unique. So it's not like with American tattoos where you can be like, oh, I kind of saw this and I want it too. Irezumi, they're creating a brand new piece of art for you, and this art is only going to be on your body and nobody else is going to have this tattoo, which I think is just really fascinating. And it's why I put a lot of thought into what Dazai's tattoo is going to be, because I feel like a lot of times when people are thinking Yakuza tattoo, it's a dragon. As like, I'm not doing a dragon. Everyone has a dragon. It's not happening. And so then I spent, I want to say like a week looking at the different symbolisms and the different themes and the motifs that you see in a lot of these tattoos in Japanese style tattooing, and the Hannya mask just fit very well for reasons that the story will start to dig into as well. We keep coming back to Dazai's tattoo as we get through the fic.
I am delighted by that. I'm delighted that he has it. I think that like the obvious symbolism being that Dazai is a man of masks is very much there. I'm also just very interested to kind of learn how that's going to be a guiding motif through this story. I mean, you've made it very clear that like deception, loyalty, masks, all of these are going to be themes that we see circling around and coming back.
Yeah.
And it feels like with Dazai, because we're seeing this from Chuya's perspective, and because Chuya's getting this very measured view of Dazai, we're not seeing any of those masks really come off yet, except... So this is where I get to ask you about the kiss.
Yes.
Yay! First kiss. I'm as confused as Chuya is right now.
Yeah.
I'm as confused as Chuya is. It's very established that like Dazai is not an emotionally impulsive person, but he's felt some very deep anger.
Yeah.
But we haven't really explored any other sides of feeling of Dazai, so I have no read on whether this kiss was a genuine thing or not.
Yeah. That's the point.
I know!
And I got so many questions about it. just over and over again. People are like, but the kiss. Why did Dazai kiss Chuya? Why? And it's a question that I got all the time. It's a question I still get. And it's a question I'm not giving you the answer to.
Fantastic. I knew you wouldn't, but I had to try.
Yeah, that's fair.
I've got to make that effort. I've got to go that distance. So here's my question about the kiss. Which one's a better kisser?
Nobody's ever asked me that before.
Yeah, I was trying really hard to come up with a question about it. I knew what you were expecting me to ask.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? Yeah, break it down for me. Give me some stylistic.
Honestly, I think they're both fantastic kissers. I don't think there's really someone that's going to come up on top here. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. They're both great.
They're both fantastic.
Yes, if you were to lip lock with Dazai or Chuya, you would be happy with the situation.
Okay, well, at least we've established that neither of them are completely horrible at it.
No, they've had a life experience in this story. They're not virgins.
Okay. You know, this hasn't actually come up yet, but it's something that I do want to remark on, and it's that I very much enjoy that so far this isn't a story about homosexuality. This is a story about an arranged marriage, the Yakuza, and the main couple happens to be gay. Can you talk a little bit about how in LGBTQ representation specifically that can be just a choice that an author has to make, basically, especially given, like, obviously we're both lesbians and we both prefer to write with queer characters, but to kind of take the homophobia out of the universe and make it a non-issue. What's the decision process behind it?
For me, there's not much of a decision process behind it. I just don't feel like writing about homophobia.
Me too.
It adds a lot to a story where I think if you're going to be writing a story where homophobia is part of the verse, first of all, the concept of this fic would never exist. They wouldn't marry Dazai and Chuya. That wouldn't happen. But then secondly, there's always a push that I find usually more often from cishet writers that if you're going to have an LGBTQ plus character in your story, they need to deal with present day struggles. They need to deal with homophobia. They need to deal with internalized homophobia. They probably have some bullying going on. I don't know, all that sort of stuff. And they're like, it needs to be real and realistic. And it's conversations that I've had with my straight friends where they're like, oh, I didn't like this movie because there was no homophobia in it. And I was like, you know what? Sometimes I just want to see some gay people living their life.
It's true.
And it's something that I think from the outside looking in, a good way to look at it is the discussions around people of color in films as well, whereas you have a lot of black films that were usually about slavery, and that's what they're about, and it's slavery, and we're always watching black people be slaves. And black people are like, you know what, we've seen it, we've lived it, we don't always want to exist in racism, and part of fiction is the escapism. There's always going to be people that really like gritty, realistic fiction, and that's, you know, just a personal preference. I don't have any issue with it, but I also really, for me, when I started reading and when I go to read a book, I don't want to read about my world. I just don't. And homophobia, unfortunately, in present day society, since imperialism and all that, that's a long history lesson, it's very entrenched in our society. So it's nice to just let the fic exist the way that I personally think society should exist. It shouldn't be an issue.
I completely agree. And I mean, obviously, as a queer person, it's very nice to read stories like this where queerness just isn't an issue.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like you said, I recognize the value of realistic stories. I recognize the value of stories about struggles. But sometimes it's really, really great to be able to say, you know what? There's magic in this universe.
Yeah.
There's weird abilities.
Yeah.
And we don't hate gay people. Like, that's just something that I think that I personally would like to see more of. I would like to see more media about people like us, but isn't centered on us suffering for our identities.
Yeah, and I think it's something that you see a lot more in fan fiction than you see in traditional media.
I agree.
Because in fan fiction, if there's homophobia in the story, that's a tag. Like, it's something that's not the expectation for you to read. It's something that writers learn about. They're like, hey, there's people that hate gay people in this story, just an FYI. So if you don't want to engage with it, you can move on. And that's something that I really think the fan fiction community does a great job about. And honestly, I read so much fan fiction. I haven't read any fan fiction over the past year because I've just been really busy. But I've read so much fan fiction, and the vast minority of it includes things like homophobia and racism, which is fantastic.
I'm like trying to think about if I've ever actively written fic that included homophobia, and I don't think I have. It's just not like, I mean, you are right, like that's our lives.
Yeah.
I just don't feel the need to rehash it in fiction.
Yeah.
But it is also very interesting because I believe that you can sometimes tell with cishet people writing gay characters is that they feel the need to address it, whereas gay people writing gay characters so often do not. And so often I feel like these cishet creators get hung up on it and don't get to develop their characters beyond it.
Yeah, I think it's something that exists whenever somebody's writing for an experience that they did not live. And so when white authors write stories about POC, there's usually just a lot of racism in them. Or when cis writers write about transgender stories, there's a lot of transphobia in them. And it's just, I think where it comes to is people going, this is not my experience, this is not my life, I don't want to sugarcoat it. And I think there's a concern of it being disrespectful, like, I don't live your experience, and so I can't pretend that it's a happy one. And I, as a person that has cis guilt or white guilt or straight guilt, needs to acknowledge all the horrible things that my majority group does to your minority group. And it's just, I think, just this psychological hang-up that people don't even realize they have until someone in one of those community goes like, hey, yeah, you don't have to write about that all the time. It's okay. You can be aware that it exists. You can be an activist about it, and you don't have to put it in every story you write.
I think that a lot of people do likely struggle with that idea of not wanting to minimize, while also hopefully not wanting to capitalize or make it pseudo-pornographic. But I think that a lot of well-meaning material done by people who are not part of marginalized groups does unfortunately fall into the like pseudo-pornographic category of portrayals of violence.
Yeah, and I don't think it's something that they're like, oh yeah, this is it, this is the story. I think it's just something where they're like, there's just this awareness of how horrible life can be for these people. And I think it really is just, they're like, I can't minimize it, so I have to show the worst of the worst. I have to show the Rodney Kings. I have to show the Emmett Tills. I have to show the Marsha P. Johnsons. And everyone else is like, we have history books.
Yeah, we really do. So in that vein, by taking the focus off of homophobia, you very much allow the focus to be on the fact that this is an incredibly violent world that these characters are in. Can you talk a little bit about that, just in terms of, I guess, how it's shaping the way that both of them are interacting with the world?
Sure. The first thing I do want to mention, though, is the why of this choice. It's because at the time I had written two of these stories before. Don't You Ever Tame Your Demons, the fic that came right before this, was very violent. But there were still times where I was like, you know what? I don't feel like the violence in the world is necessarily reflected in the people. So I feel like there's people living in this violent world, and they're not necessarily like, it's not completely cohesive. And I felt the same thing when I was reading fics. I was like, you know what? I think it's just because us in BSD, there's a port mafia. It's like one of the main characters in the story. And so we're used to the mafia idea, and I feel like because we're so used to it, we kind of lose some of that like danger and the darkness that can kind of ooze in those stories when you're not used to it. And the example I use is actually Yuri on Ice, where the mafia stories are so much darker in that fandom. And I think it's because they aren't taking a canon staple and rewriting it. They're going, we're sticking these people in a mafia, and the mafia is a horrible place to be. And so that's something that I wanted to take from the fics that I'd read in Yuri on Ice and kind of bring it into my BSD fic and go, I don't really want a chapter to go by where the reader forgets that these two men are incredibly, incredibly dangerous. We like them, they're the protagonists, they're not good people. They, like, Chuya gets a little bit of bloodlust in this chapter. Dazai went off and tortured a guy to make himself feel better in the last chapter.
Time.
Yeah. And so I just never wanted the violence and the darkness that comes with being in organized crime to really go away from the characters. So when we talk about how that shapes them and their interactions with the world, for you and I, we live in a world where, you know, we walk out of the house with some pepper spray, maybe a pocket knife. That's all we need to worry about. For Dazai and Chuya, when they leave, they need to be armed. They need to have, like, 2 pistols. They need to have knives everywhere. They're just constantly in the state of high alert. And because they're in the state of high alert, we get a little bit of that paranoia. But we also get just this complete ease with things that normal people wouldn't be comfortable with. Dazai gets shot, and they're like, okay, let's deal with it in the kitchen. That's not a normal thing. And so it's really just kind of seeing them normalize violence and the consequences of violence that most of the readers will not have any experience with.
Especially seeing it juxtaposed on things like Chuya getting his head hung up over a date. It's just a very, very interesting juxtaposition because you have very much gone the route of these characters are not good people. They do bad things. They exist in a violent world and they're reflections of it. Have you found that writing within that takes a different, wow, how am I trying to phrase this? What am I trying to say? Have you found that writing within a world so violent and writing characters who are, like, solidly in the anti-hero camp, have you found that that makes it a little bit harder to keep the story lighthearted in any way, shape, or form? Because thus far, there's no one in this story who I would classify as a good person, but it doesn't feel like reading about horrible people.
So I can't say that for me, writing this violent world really takes away the lightheartedness of the story. I kind of liken it to, we're going to talk superhero films for a second. It's because we're going to talk about Zack Snyder's superhero films and Christopher Nolan's superhero films, which are both very much on the incredibly gritty, dark, the worst of the worst parts of being a superhero. Because when you think about superheroes, they're out there killing people, and they're dealing with people that are also killing people and trying to destroy the entire world. They have incredible burdens on them. But like, when I talk to people, I grew up really in comics. My dad really liked comics. My uncle gave me collecting cards when I was a little kid. So I was like a comic head. And what I tell people is I'm like, you know what? The Dark Knight trilogy is a great set of movies. It's not a Batman series.
I agree.
Because it's just too, you lose all the levity and the characters. And part of Batman is the jokes between Bruce and Alfred. That's, you know, lighthearted stuff. Part of Batman is they literally made an entire character because they're like, Batman's too dark, we need a sidekick, and then we get Robin. And then you have stories like Black Panther, or like Thor Ragnarok, yes, where there's dark things happening in those stories, but you still get levity. And when you get levity, the dark hits more. Because if we're just constantly in this gruel and grind, it's a reason why the Zack Snyder films didn't do that well critically when we're talking about that sort of thing. And I think with the audiences as well, to some degree, is just because you're just constantly being hit. You're constantly being hit. It's just dark, and it's dark, and it's dark, and it's dark, and you don't get a pause. You just keep getting sadder. And, that's not really a fun experience. Whereas when you get hit with like, oh, this is intense violence, and oh my god, they're just like swinging a severed head around as they walk down the street. That's pretty funny. But then you're also hit with the like, wow, they're just so comfortable in this world that they can make a joke about anything, which I think does a lot to make the darkness darker. Because, when they have the fight in this chapter and Daza's like, leave this person alive, and they start bickering about it, and then he kills himself. It's not a like, oh no, he died. She's like, damn, thanks a lot, you idiot. And it's just this casual acceptance with this world. And it's something that I feel like when we're talking about people and individuals, when you look at some of the worst people that have been in history or that are alive today, they're not without senses of humor. They're horrible, horrible people, but they still crack a joke. And that's just because they're still human beings. Like when we look at organized crime, for anyone that doesn't know, my background educationally is in politics. So when we look at organized crime down in Latin America, South America, and you see these people that are the head of these big cartels, people like them. They're terrified of them, but they can sit down and have a great dinner with them and joke around and have a good time. And then they can, get up and shoot the person next to them and go on their way. And so it's just kind of what we talked about towards the first or second episode, I want to say, where you want to make people not caricatures. And people have senses of humor. They don't all land with everyone, but I want to say like probably 98% of the human beings alive have a sense of humor.
Like, fingers crossed. I think a sense of humor, in whatever form it may take, is a pretty essential form of a lot of communication. I also think that was a really great response to, like, the Zack Snyders and the Christopher Nolans of the storytelling world, who very much seem to believe that levity cheapens the darkness. Because I actually agree with you very strongly. I think that it is far more impactful to be able to relax and laugh a little bit with these characters, and also to see that they are so comfortable in this world where they are saturated with violence that they're able to make these jokes. Especially Chuya and Dazai's banter comes out very much in the stressful situation of this gunfight. And I found it very interesting that Chuya reacted the same way that I did to Dazai getting shot. But also, it's Dazai, and because I do have, I guess, the fourth wall and a lot of Dazai characterization in my back pocket, I am low-key wondering if he did not intentionally make that choice to catch a bullet.
He did not.
Okay. That was a genuine accident.
Yeah, and so something that people just kind of get used to when they're reading my stories is that the Dazai I write is a human being. He's ridiculously intelligent. He's way too crafty. He's a master manipulator. He's still human, and as such, he is still subject to human error. And there's just some things, no matter how much you're planning, you can't rely on somebody being so gung-ho on taking out the big bull that they're not going to go about, what about this easier target? Can we shoot him? Like, obviously, most of them weren't thinking about that, but there's always, like, just one outlier. And that's all it takes to cause a problem, which I think, honestly, makes, when Dazai does get things right, much more impressive. Just the fact that he can make a mistake makes everything that falls into place perfectly just that much more like a wow, what a clever guy that is. And so the Dazai I write is still manipulative. He's still going to do things and maybe make them seem like an accident when they're not an accident, but he can still make mistakes.
I also think that adds a lot to the Dazai characterization because, as you said, it very much builds up the fact that he is this brilliant strategist, and the fact that he doesn't always get it 100% right. is probably going to make, when his schemes get very complex and very twisty, it's going to make it even more impressive to watch it all fall together. It's a very interesting way to watch Dazai be developed through Chuya's eyes. Because by not having that window into Dazai's brain, we get as much as Chuya gets, which I think it's frustrating in a good way, if that makes sense. It's something that I think almost forces the reader to empathize with Chuya. Like, even if they came into this story either not knowing much about BSD or just being a very, very strong Dazai bias, it forces you to learn Chuya's thought patterns, and it forces you to learn and to see how Dazai is interacting with those. But because you're not getting Dazai's side of the story, do you think that it's natural that your readers are going to end up empathizing with Chuya a little bit more at this point?
Yes, and I think it's just, from my point of view, Chuya is just the more empathetic character, even when we're looking in canon. Just because he's not a grade A asshole. And we have those moments where we do really feel for Dazai, but they're not as often as when Chuya is humanized. And for me, what's interesting is people get out of my stories and they come talk to me and they're like, oh, you're obviously a Chuya stan. And I'm like, honestly, when I started my first fic, I was just like, I do like this dynamic. I know next to nothing about Chuya because I was rolling in with 2 seasons of the anime, no other knowledge. And so, but that was still very much heavily characterized through Chuya's POV. I think it's because he's just the more easily sympathizable character. He's the one where his thoughts are going to be more interesting to experience because I just don't think it's as fun to look through Dazai's eyes and be able to go, oh, that person's lying. Oh, that person's lying. Oh, this isn't what's happening. Dazai can call it all out. And I feel like if it's not called out, it's not really Dazai's POV. Whereas Chuya can miss things. And people are not like as taken aback by Chuya missing things as they are with Dazai missing things.
That makes a lot of sense in the grand Dazai scheme of things, and I do agree, but I think it is more interesting to get that perspective from someone who is entering situations in a more human way, I think. One of the things that I'm currently most interested in is, of course, what shaped Dazai's worldview, because I know you're going to get into it, and you've established him as being so off in just about every way that a person can be off in a social interaction. Dazai is. Yeah. So I am very interested to hear the why behind it. I'm very interested to see where it leads him going forward. And I'm so curious about that kiss. I'm so curious.
So is everyone.
Dude, why did you do that? I think that's what I've got for you today. So if you have questions for me.
I do have questions, but I don't want to jump straight into the questions. I do want to just talk about a couple other conversation points. The first being that this is the first chapter I posted as Writing from the Shadows.
Yes.
So the first 4 were anonymous, and then people were like, I bet it's Writing from the Shadows. I bet it's Writing from the Shadows. And the reason I actually did decide to go ahead and go like, yes, this is me when I posted this chapter, was because there was another anonymous fic that was very popular at the time, and people were contributing it to me as well, and I didn't want to take that credit. So it's like, this one is me, this is the only one I have, do not, don't give me the praise for this fic. It's a good fic, I don't know who's writing it, it's not me. And so that's actually why I posted this chapter. But a fun anecdote is that I posted this chapter, and this, I want to say when I posted it, I think it was like missing a whole chunk or something. I don't know. There was something wrong with the chapter. I was like, I can't believe when I finally own up to this fic, I fuck up the chapter. But yeah. And then another thing I want to mention is the action sequence.
Yes.
I'm just reading my notes right now. That one just says lies. I don't know what it was about, but somebody was lying. So with Where Your Loyalties Lie, I don't remember what was going on at the time, where I was just really on this train of like, it's impossible to write Chuya as badass as he actually is. You can't do it. And my reasoning for that is that one scene, whenever I write a Chuya action sequence, I just go, is it worthy of that scene where they're looking at him through the security monitor and Fukuzawa's like, how many are coming? And it's one, and then it just cuts out, the feed cuts out. That's so badass. That's so hardcore. And it just says so much about Chuya. Like, this is an army, and one teeny little man
Itty bitty.
who does half his fighting with his hands in his pockets because he can just crush you without them. Doesn't even need his ability to kill you. Like, he's such a badass. And so something I was really wanted to focus on with the story was writing his badassery as well as I could. And a lot of people have issues with writing action sequences. And this was the fic that made me love writing action sequences, because I finally figured out how to do it. I was like, wait, that was pretty hardcore.
That was a really, really fun action sequence to read. I have actually noticed that a lot of people get very tangled up in them.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're very hard to follow. Yours was very clear, very concise. I knew where Chuya was. I knew where everyone else was. And it was badass. Like, the impact, both literally and figuratively, that Chuya had in that room was very immediate. I actually noticed that you showed the tone of that badassery partially for Chuya's actions and partially for the response to Chuya's actions.
Yeah. And so the reason I want to say a lot of people have issues with action sequences is because there's always things happening simultaneously. So it's not like a conversation where one person goes back and forth. When you have an action sequence, it's Chuya's reacting to their action, and Dazai's reacting to Chuya's action and their action, and they're reacting to their reaction. So there's all this feedback loop of things happening second to second, especially in a fight with gunfire, because guns are fast. Grade A analysis here today.
Very good analysis.
And one thing that I found that really, really helped, two things actually, with writing action sequences. One was cutting what I have dubbed fake time. I don't know what the actual phrase for this is. I read a Tumblr post about it and then promptly forgot the terminology they use. But fake time is phrases like a few moments, or a little bit, or a while, where when the writer writes that phrase, they kind of have an idea of how long that is. The reader doesn't know how long that is. We can kind of go in our head, okay, a few moments, whatever. How long is that? But it doesn't have an impact. Whereas what I did with this to get rid of that fake time was Chuya's breathing. So he takes one breath, he picks his target. He takes another breath, he shifts. He takes another breath, he's gone. And so that's something that we, as the reader, can quantify and go, how long does it take me to breathe? 1, 2, 3. It's so fast. And that's really how you get, like, one way to really get the quick pace, almost simultaneous action in an action sequence is by really tying the action to tangible things for the reader. So breaths, heartbeats, how many bullets are in the clip, that sort of thing, to really build up the tension. And then the other thing is just making it as dynamic as possible. And that's really easy with Chuya because he can do gravity manipulation. I was like, he's going on this fucking ceiling.
He's going on the ceiling.
But then something that people often skip over when they're doing action sequences is the reaction and the consequence. You know, if we're talking physics, the reaction has an equal opposite reaction. Chuya gets on the ceiling. Okay, that means everyone's looking up. Chuya drops from the ceiling. There's a lot of times where Chuya will drop from the ceiling in the fic and he just lands on the ground and starts going. But if Chuya is using his ability, that has the increased gravity. We've seen it in the anime, we've seen it in the manga, where, you know, he can fracture the room, dust plumes up. There's just all of these images that you can create with the actions and the reactions that make an action sequence flow faster. And then my third kind of little thing about action sequences is that I think a lot of writers, and I was one of these writers, think that in order to write a good action sequence, it has to be lengthy. It doesn't. This scene is a page long, not even a page long. It's half of a page, 3/4 of a page.
And most of a very quick action happens within the span of one paragraph, actually.
Yeah. And so if I were to have stretched that out, it would have felt like it was a long action sequence. So, like, you would have been reading it going like, okay, we know Chuya's gonna win. When is he gonna win? You'd also be reading it like, you know what, I feel like Chuya can beat these people faster. And so a lot of writers feel like in order to make an action sequence good, you have to be concerned about whether or not they're going to win. Whereas I think that you can also just be in awe of the badassery. It doesn't have to be like this tense, like, oh no, what's he going to do? It can just be an example of how utterly competent someone is in their craft. So yeah, that was just my little tangent about action sequence. I'm now very passionate about them. There is an action sequence towards the very end of this fic that we're going to spend like 15 minutes dissecting because it took me like a week to write and plan out. Because when it does come to larger and more complicated action sequences, it's like choreography or it's like blocking if you do theater. Mm-hmm. You really have to know where each person's going and how each movement is going to impact everyone in the room.
That's going to be really, really interesting for me. That's actually something that my own writing has historically struggled with, is action sequences. I get lost in my own wordiness sometimes. But you write some very clear and very concise action sequences, and I think that you partially kind of mentioned it in saying that there's a misconception that action sequences have to be long. I would almost argue that for a very impactful action sequence, you can lose it in the length. Like, you can lose it in the length and the description, and then it loses the physical impact, which I think is usually the aim of any action sequences. It's to show off a physical impact.
Yeah, I would say just like as a rule of thumb when it comes to action sequences and their length, long scenes, save those for wars. And my Yuri on Ice fic, they go to war and there's just this massive war scene that's like, I want to say the whole chapter. Because when you look at the magnitude of war and when you get down and somebody's like in the middle of it, there's just these moments where people feel time dilation and they're like, there's like, I can feel each breath and I can see everything in slow motion. And so that, like, the gravitas and the magnitude and the horror of war is really something that gets across with a longer sequence. Whereas when we're doing like a short little, like, this is just like a 1-2 punch for the chapter, it's a way to show this person's incompetent, it's a way to move the scene along, one of those things. It can be shorter because, you know, it's not like in a TV series where we're like, oh, how's the fight scene going to be? We're reading a story to continue the story along. So for those sort of things, I would stick to shorter action sequences.
That was super informative.
We're learning a lot today. This is the most informative episode of this podcast.
An incredibly informative episode. I know we were like, we're just going to talk about the fic, but like, I feel like you can't discuss a truly excellent work without discussing what makes it truly excellent, and that is in fact a lot of a writing technique and style that you bring to it. So
thank you. That's why I was really excited about this podcast, because I've talked about this story, people ask me questions about the story, but there was really so much that went into it that I couldn't describe in the author's commentary, or that I can't think of when I am writing the answers. So getting to have a dialogue about it really helps all the other stuff come to life.
It's also a very interesting way to read it. Like, I feel like most people don't really get to consume media and be able to do essentially like a chapter-by-chapter breakdown with the creator to really get into what's going on. So just as a way to consume a piece of media, this is very unique for me, but it's very fulfilling, because sometimes, especially with fic, sometimes I feel like I have to second guess the author, and there's none of that in this fic because of the way I read the chapter and then we immediately discuss it. So it's also very fresh, and I feel like it sort of helps. It helps me make sure that I am following the story that you're wanting to tell. And it's a good story.
Thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
I'm enjoying it a lot. You'd know if I wasn't.
Yeah, I would.
I would be asking some very different questions.
And then my next just conversation point is, we mentioned last episode about Easter eggs and how I had put Amelia in my latest update of Even on the Darkest Night. She also appeared in this fic, where after Dazai gets injured and they're doing the stitches, and there's the Not for the first time, Chia wonders if Dazai can read minds. He knows Dazai has some sort of ability, though he's yet to find out what it does. Chia isn't even positive that telepathy is an ability someone can have. And so it's just like, I like doing those little winks to people. They're like, wait a second, you wrote a telepathic OC.
I was wondering where in the time frame this came in with Illustrations of Lying, because I did catch that Easter egg.
Illustrations of Lying was first.
Okay.
Don't You Ever Tame Your Demons was second. Where Your Loyalties Lie is third.
I gotcha. As someone who is a huge fan of Miss Amelia Alderson, your character, not the real author, all respect to her, but I've never read her. But
her books are very boring. Don't read her books. I had to read her book. I didn't read her book for Illustrations of Lying, but each chapter had a quote from her book. It's just so sanctimonious and boring.
Oh, Lord.
All right, Rika Watch, episode 4. What's on the list?
All right, we are back with Rika Watch for episode 4. Let's see. Rika Watch currently. Who's the mole?
Do you have a suspicion?
Can I say Ongo? He's not in this story, but he's a snitch.
It's valid.
Maybe it's Ongo. That's my guess for this episode, is the mole is Ongo.
Okay.
There was also the line about Chuya's certainty of it not being Higuchi makes me suspicious of Higuchi. But right now I'm saying it's Ongo.
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Rika Watch number 2. Why did Dazai kiss Chuya? That was an obvious one to put on Rika Watch, but yeah, I'll bite. I'm fascinated. 3. How many emotions does Dazai have? Like, if we were to go through and make him tick off a list, how many does this man experience?
I will say that he experiences more than you're suspecting.
I'm suspecting a very small number.
Yes,
so...
I know. I know you're probably expecting like 3 emotions.
Yeah.
He has more than 3 emotions.
He has more than 3 emotions, okay. More than 3 emotions, dude. That's actually kind of impressive for him. Let's see, that was Rika Watch number 2. So number 3 is going to be...
That was number 3.
Was that number 3?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
It was the mole, the kiss, emotions.
Oh, you're right. I can't count. Math is hard. Math is really hard. Simple addition is, in fact, too much.
This is counting. This isn't addition.
Numbers are too much for me. Please, help me. I am a soft sciences and a language person. On to number 4. Let's see. He wasn't in this chapter, but I'm still side-eyeing Mori and his involvement with everything. I still think that he is involved in whatever this big group is, so I want to know what his role is.
Okay.
There's something going on. Mori.
I feel like Mori's been on every Rika Watch.
Yes, because he's scheming. The man walks into a scene, and I'm like, you're scheming. You're fucking scheming. Okay, so Rika Watch number 5. I need a good one.
Okay.
I need a good one. I want to see who is going to develop actual feelings first and how they will deal with it. I know that if it's Dazai, he's going to hide the shit out of it. But I'm curious to see, and I'm curious to see if I'm going to be able to tell.
Okay. That's a good one. That is a question that people have asked me. I've actually had a couple of people ask me, like, can you point to the place where Dazai started feeling things and where Chuya started feeling things? And I've done that for Tumblr Ask before. I'd have to look back and see what place I pointed to. But it is for me, you know what, actually I'm not giving you that hint.
That was mean.
I'm sorry.
It was really mean.
Nobody else got that hint.
No special treatment.
No. The story was meant to be read with cliffhangers.
I can tell. I look forward to the next week and the next cliffhanger and the next time I get to say Mori's scheming.
I'm trying to see how bad the cliffhanger for next episode is. We'll have to see. Oh, I don't even have to look.
Oh, it's that bad. It's that bad.
I would say it's a bad cliffhanger.
That can mean a lot of things, Des.
It could mean a lot of things. But it's noticeable enough for me to remember without having to look at my notes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think those are all my questions. Because you said you weren't expecting a tattoo, right?
No, I wasn't.
Mm.
I was like, it was in the back of my mind, but most of the Bungo fic and Bungo meta that I've read / done has filled the bandages in with scars.
Yeah.
And like I know that that's a canon point, but also that's in like canon material that's not easily accessible, and quite frankly, everyone in the fandom who has guessed that there's tattoos under those bandages, it comes from a really good standpoint for it, so I'm happy to see it done.
Yeah, I don't have a single opinion on what canon Dazai has under. I don't know. I can't say that I'm that intrigued by it. I just think Dazai is a drama queen. But while we're here,
Right.
while we're talking about the tattoo, I do just want to hop back to the symbolism that we picked, the Hanya mask. How much do you know about the Hanya mask?
Very,
Okay.
very little.
I think that's the common answer for most people that are reading this story. I didn't know anything about the Hanya mask until I started researching motifs. And so it's used in Japanese Kyogen theater shows. And this is actually a link that's in the fic. I sent people to this webpage. And it was used to represent a tormented female demon overtaken by jealousy and contempt. One of the most popular plays that utilize the Hanya mask tells the story of Prince Genji, who was married to Lady Ao, but had a mistress named Lady Rakujo. I think that's good. When his wife became pregnant, Prince Genji started to ignore Lady Rakujo. As a result, she turns into an immensely jealous woman and is overcome with violent anger. With blinding rage, she transforms into a demon and possesses the wife and kills her.
That's gonna be some really, that's some really heavy symbolism.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of different things that the mask can mean. It can mean anger, jealousy, resentment. It can mean pure evil. It can mean passion, love, good luck, judge of good and evil, wisdom, a tormented female spirit, a haunted past, or a theater. What's really interesting about the Hanya mask, and which I doubt most people reading the story do, but is that I do include, and why the tattoo is the way it is, the colors and everything are very deliberate choices. The redder a Hanya mask is, the stronger the emotions it's connected to.
All right.
Yeah, so I think that's just a very interesting. There's just so many fascinating things when it comes to the history. And this link, I'll go ahead and include it in the YouTube video as well as in the AO3 page, just so that if you are curious about reading up on this page has the history, it has all the emotions. It also talks about the color intensity. So with a lighter complexion, it means that the wearer is not yet a demon. A darker red represents someone who's already been through a hellish emotional past. A deep dark red is symbolic of someone who is filled with rage and is out for vengeance. So there's just a lot of intricacies with it, and I was like, oh, I love this.
It was a very, very interesting choice. I was actually considering asking you about the symbolism earlier in the episode, and then my brain was like, she's not going to answer it.
I think the symbolism is really fascinating, and I think because there's so many different things the mask can mean, it's not like a big giveaway. We all know that Dazai has issues. Yeah, I don't know if you've picked up some of his bad habits throughout the story, because there is a particular one that gets very lightly characterized throughout the entire fic.
Is it the alcoholism?
It is.
Yeah, I picked that up.
Yeah. So
That's a canon thing too, but is never addressed in canon. It's just a thing.
Yeah, I don't know. Does he drink a lot in?
I mean, he's always
Because I know he drank a lot when he left the Port Mafia.
He did go on his sake bender after he left the Port Mafia.
Yeah.
I guess if it is kind of I am judging that from his post-Mafia capture sake vendor, which I will give him a benefit of the doubt and say I would probably do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I'd probably do the same thing too. I'm kind of the opinion that he doesn't drink heavily in the ADA just because I feel like Kunikita would yell about it at some point. I feel like we would have been told.
Probably.
Yeah. Kunikita or Yoshino would have said something, I feel like.
Oh my gosh. I think you're right. I don't think that would have anything to do with Kunikita's ideal, having a partner who smells of liquor at all times.
Yeah, and I just, I don't doubt that Dazai can put together a good plan drunk, but if I was the AD, I would prefer that he was sober while doing these massive strategy sessions.
As would I.
Okay, so yeah, that's all I have on the mask. The link will have tons more about this. It's a fascinating read. I highly recommend. I'll also try and hunt down that Vice video and link that as well because it's a really good watch. I think I actually have it linked in my writing notes somewhere. But yeah, do you have anything else for this chapter?
I think that's about it. Again, very fun chapter. It's been fun to have them all build, too. And I'm excited for next week.
Yay, I'm excited, too. I have a fun story about how next week's chapter starts.
Wonderful.
Okay, well, with that is said, if you've watched all the way to the end, if you've been watching the series, thank you so much for watching. If you have questions for us about Chapter 6, leave those in the comments either on the AO3 page or on the YouTube page, or you can send those to my Curious Cat, which is linked across everything. But with that said, we will see you hopefully next week. Bye.
Bye.